What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Bass Fishing Declassified. In this video, I'm going to share the 3 rules of wintertime Carolina rig fishing. Let's get into it. Rule number 1 of wintertime Carolina rig fishing is lengthen your leader. On average, when I'm fishing a Carolina rig in the wintertime, I use a 4 to 6 foot leader. I actually measured my wingspan a few years back, not because I wanted to get scouted for sports or anything, but so I could measure my Carolina rig leaders. And I have a 6'4" wingspan, and so it kind of allows me to gauge the length of that Carolina rig leader. So this is like 4.5, 5 feet right here. And I was told years ago to throw as long of a leader as possible, as long as you're comfortable enough to cast it. And this is from some old timers when I was fishing as a co-angler as a kid. And I always used to throw like a 2.5 foot leader on my Carolina rig, and I would do okay, and it was kind of the ultimate co-angler bait, especially in like central Arkansas. Everyone just bombed the Carolina rig behind the boat, and I was always told, son, you need to lengthen your Carolina rig leader. So they would cut me out a piece of line, it'd be 5 feet long, and I would barely be able to cast the thing behind my bait. I was using like a 7-foot rod. It was a nightmare. But eventually I kind of figured it out. I got my rod dialed in, I got my casting dialed in, and I started cracking them on a Carolina rig. Something about a very long leader on the Carolina rig in the wintertime is just deadly. I feel like it slows you down because that's really what you're doing when you're fishing a Carolina rig is you're fishing the weight, not the bait. And having that longer leader will basically slow that bait down. Especially as it falls, it will fall a lot slower and glide down. I need to make sure I'm in camera. It's so long of a leader. But anyways, it'll glide down. And then as you pull it, it kind of delays the pull on that bait. So instead of moving that bait, let's say 5-6 feet on a pull, maybe you're only moving it 2 to 3 feet because you're pulling up so much slack in the line. And I think that just slows you down and allows you to keep that bait in the strike zone longer. In addition, it gets that bait a little bit further away from the weight, which I do think can help when the fish are a little bit more lethargic, though I'm not 100% sold on that concept. When the water temperatures are warmer though, I will go down to like a 2 to 3 foot leader, so I don't always use a long leader. It's mainly when the water temperatures are below 48 degrees. As far as my other Carolina rig setup, I basically always throw a 3/4 ounce to 1 ounce Carolina rig weight, and then I use a bead. This is just a plastic bead, not a glass bead, because those glass beads can break. And then I just have a knot protector as well as a swivel. You can buy these things in a kit. I'll put it down in the description below. And then you just tie your swivel to a leader and then tie that to a hook. And my go-to hook for a Carolina rig is usually anywhere from a 3 to 4/0 offset round bend worm hook. I like just a standard offset round bend, not an EWG. It just seems to do the best for me. And for my leader, I actually will use the exact same pound test for my leader line as my main line. I watched a video several years ago from Mark Davis explaining this, and I kind of just took his advice on that, and it's worked out really well for me over the years. So I use 20-pound fluorocarbon for my main line and 20-pound fluorocarbon for my leader line. And I sometimes will go down to lighter leaders at times if I feel like the fish are really pressured or the water's super clear. But if the water visibility is below 3 foot, I'll just go to that 20-pound fluorocarbon leader, and I don't have any issues with it. As far as my baits go, I basically like to throw a few different baits, usually some type of creature or beaver style bait. And the two I've been throwing most recently are this Yamamoto flapping hog. I really like the gliding motion of this bait, and it has a lot of appendages. Or some type of smaller creature bait like a baby brush hog, a striking game hog, or this is the X-Zone, what's it called? The X-Zone Stealth Creature. I just picked a pack up of these the other day. I've not actually ever thrown them, but it's a small little creature bait. Any type of kind of brush hog style bait will do though. And those are kind of just the baits I go with. I'm not super picky about the baits I throw. A lot of guys swear by lizards and centipedes. There's all kinds of baits I've thrown over the years. I used to be a big lizard guy, but recently I've just been going to more of these like kind of creature or hog style baits. I don't even know what you want to call them, but these type of baits, and they've been doing really well for me, and I don't really think, again, it makes too much of a difference which bait you're throwing. I don't even think color makes that big of a difference. When I was fishing the Arkansas River growing up, I used to always swear by June bug, but then I got my butt kicked by watermelon candy one tournament, and we're fishing in a foot of water visibility, and I'm getting my butt kicked by watermelon candy, and I'm throwing June bug. So I don't even know. Color is something I'm not really 100% sold on in terms of it making a difference with the bass. But either way, that's my setup with the Carolina rig. And then finally with my rod, I'm just gonna be throwing something from a 7'4" to 7'6" bait casting rod. I used to go to like a 7'8", 7'10" rod, and I just feel like it's too unwielding, especially when you set the hook. I'm tall, I'm over 6 feet tall, but still even that longer rod, I feel like just seems kind of cumbersome when setting the hook. I can get a good enough hook set with a 7'4" to 7'6" rod, but I do like to use a heavy power rod. So this is a heavy power, and then I have, this is kind of more of like a moderate action rod, but you can also use a fast action rod. I don't think it's super critical. I like this moderate action actually to cast the bait a little bit better. This is a frog rod, and you can kind of load it up a little bit better and fling it out there. And I don't have that many issues with hookups, so I've been experimenting with this rod recently, but you can just use like a 7'4" heavy fast too. Works really well. And then just pairing that with my standard Black Max reel. So that's rule number one though. Go longer on your leader than you would think.
Really quick, I want to let you know about a new seminar I posted on fishthemoment.com. This seminar is focused on finding patterns that forward-facing sonar anglers are missing. If you only have traditional 2D sonar, down scan, or side scan, and want to regain an advantage over all those scopers out there, this is the seminar for you. I'm going to be sharing patterns that are very hard to replicate with forward-facing sonar and show you on a lot of different lake types how to implement these patterns that catch big 5 bass limits, whether you're fun fishing or in tournaments. This seminar is happening on Friday, February 7th. You can participate live during the seminar, and you'll also receive a recording of the entire seminar afterwards that'll be emailed to you. Definitely check it out at fishthemoment.com.
Rule number 2 of wintertime Carolina rig fishing is drag uphill. This is something I talked about in my recent video about wintertime swim bait fishing, and if you haven't seen that video, I'll leave a link down in the description below. It's a really good one, so you should check it out. In that video, I talked about the importance of fishing a swim bait uphill. So basically, if this is the bank and this is out in the middle of the lake, you position your boat in shallower water, cast into deeper water, and work your bait up the slope. I feel like this makes a big difference with swim baits, but I also feel like it makes a big difference with a Carolina rig. I don't know if it's because that weight kind of drags into the side of the slope, kind of stirring up mud and getting the fish's attention, and then that kind of bait glides in there and they come and eat it, or if it's just based on that same instinct I talked about in the swim bait video, where bass like to ambush their prey in shallower water rather than deeper water. But I've found that it is always more effective if I can position my boat in shallower water and then cast out deeper. This is something I'll do on points, on ledges, on humps, and especially in ditches. I fish a lot of ditches with a Carolina rig in my region of the country. You'll have grass in these ditches, and you also just have brush piles and things. And bass will set up in these ditches or drains and chase bait fish, but some of those fish will sit directly on the bottom of the lake around any type of hard bottom that's down there, or just kind of hanging out on the bottom as they wait to rise up and chase shad. So what you'll do is you'll basically position your boat if there's a ditch that comes in, and I want to actually position my boat at the very end of the ditch where it kind of peters out into the flat, or it's the shallowest portion of the ditch. I'll then bomb my Carolina rig into the deeper portion of the ditch, straight down the center, and drag it. I'll also get on the sides of the ditch up on top of the flat and cast into the middle of the ditch and bring my Carolina rig back up. And I find that's a lot more effective for me in the wintertime than actually putting my boat in the middle of the ditch in deep water and casting up onto the flat into shallower water. The key with all of this though is you want to make sure, again, that your boat is in shallower water and your bait is going to deeper water regardless of the type of structure you're fishing. And you also want to make sure that bait is maintaining bottom contact. You're using a pretty heavy weight, like I mentioned, 3/4 ounce to 1 ounce Carolina rig weight, and you should be able to feel the bottom with this if you're around some type of rock and it's not just like a silty or completely muddy bottom. If you're not feeling this bait ticking against the bottom of the lake, especially with fluorocarbon line and a decent rod, then you're not fishing your bait on the bottom. This is definitely a technique where you need to feel bottom contact. So drag that bait close to the bottom, work it up that hill. It'll actually help you feel bottom contact more as you bring the bait uphill because your bait's not going to be going deeper. So it really helps you maintain that bottom contact. It should be just digging up that hill as you go up the hill. So if you're not feeling bottom contact, you are doing something wrong. Either you don't have a rod that's sensitive enough or your bait has literally come off. I don't know how you wouldn't feel the Carolina rig, but if you're not feeling it, that is a problem because you're probably just working it through the middle of the water column. So that is rule number 2. Rule number 3 of wintertime Carolina rig fishing actually isn't a rule just for the winter. It's a good rule of thumb year-round for Carolina rigs, and that is to sweep your hook set. Whenever I'm fishing a Carolina rig, I like to make sure that I work it with my rod tip to the side. I don't like to work it with my rod tip going up like you might fish a jig or maybe a worm. You really want to drag that rod to the side. And then once you feel some resistance, you will want to make sure that the resistance isn't necessarily the weight getting stuck into the rock. Instead, you want to almost feel like something's pulling back on your bait. And the reason for that is because you're usually just feeling the weight itself, and then this bait is so far back here. So you almost want to feel like something is pulling back on your weight. That's when you know you'll have a fish on. Something is pulling your weight away from you. That's the feeling of a bite. And as soon as you feel that, you need to do 2 things. First, you want to make sure that you reel up your slack so that your rod is pointed directly at your bait. So you want to not set the hook when your rod is, let's say, pointed all the way over here to the side of the boat. You want to reel down until your rod tip is pointed right at your Carolina rig weight. Then you're going to set the hook and you're going to set it to the side. I have a light here, so I can't do this super easily, but you want to set that hook to the side and drive that hook home on a sideways sweep. This will give you a lot of room to actually pull up slack and set the hook hard on that fish. And the reason you do that again is because you're going to have a lot of slack between your weight and your Carolina rig bait. If that fish eats your bait and starts swimming towards your weight, then you have to catch up a lot of slack to get to that fish. Hopefully though, you're not setting the hook too soon in those situations because you're waiting for your line to be fully taut. This is hard because the leader's so long. Let's just go like this. You're waiting for that line to be fully taut. You're waiting for them to pull back on your bait away from your weight. Then you're going to set that hook, and you have to have a lot of momentum and a lot of pull because you have to connect that force through your weight, through your swivel, and through your leader line into that bait. That's why I really like throwing these these round bend hooks, not an EWG, a standard round bend offset worm hook. And I will always try to basically stick that hook point out of the bait and then Texpose it on the outside if at all possible, so you really don't need to put a ton of pressure on those fish to drive the hook home. On some thinner baits, you can bury the hook inside of that bait, but if you bury it inside like that, it is more weedless, yes, but you have a lot harder time driving that hook point home. That's one of the reasons I like these Yamamoto plastics specifically, is because they're super soft. So even if I bury that hook into the bait, it's not that big of a deal. I can usually drive that hook point home even if it's buried in the bait, and it will allow it to be a little more weedless. So I do like the Yamamoto plastics for that reason. They're just super soft. But to reiterate what I was talking about, there's a lot going on there. You want to drag your rod to the side. When you feel that fish pulling against your weight, reel your reel handle down, point your rod at your Carolina rig with a tight line, and then pull to the side. Basically give a big sweeping hook set to the side. That's going to drive that hook home. You're going to actually get that fish and hook them, and then after they're hooked, most of the time you're going to land them on the Carolina rig. As long as you get the hook into that fish, it's almost a guarantee that they're in the boat. So that's the good thing about it. And I've got some absolute giant fish in the Carolina rig over the years. It used to be kind of my go-to bait when I was tournament fishing back in like 2013, which was interesting. I had a year where I was like the Carolina rig guy. And I actually don't like throwing a Carolina rig all that much. It's the old ball and chain, they say. It's like everyone's least favorite rig to throw. But I was doing so well on it for an entire fishing season, not just through the winter, but also in the spring spring, I was catching spawning fish with it in the spawn. Post-spawn, I was cracking them through the summer and into the fall. So Carolina rig is definitely still a great tool for catching fish. I've kind of fallen out of using it just because it's not, again, my favorite rig to throw necessarily day in, day out. It's probably not the most enjoyable rig to throw, but if you're fishing tournaments or you really are just struggling to get bites, throwing the Carolina rig will get bites and it will put a lot of fish in the boat. So it's definitely worth using, especially now that not that many guys are throwing it anymore. So definitely give it a shot. It's a great wintertime bait, probably the best time of year to throw it. Just use that longer leader, use the gear I was talking about, and you're gonna catch some really nice fish this winter on the Carolina rig. Thanks for checking out this video. We'll see you on the next one.